Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be covering the long-term planning of strength training and how we can periodize our strength training in order to achieve the highest strength gains that we possibly can and optimize our athletic performance. So in terms of the phases of strength training, so how we can structure our strength training, we have these three general topics that we can classify our phases of strength training in. So the first one would be going through a hypertrophy phase of training, and this is where the goal is to build muscle, so that's where the name comes from, hypertrophy, and to build some connective tissue tolerance, and then secondarily to build work capacity. So basically what we're doing in this phase is that we're building the structures of the muscle and connective tissue complex, and we're also starting to build some work capacity, which is going to allow us to handle more total work in future phases of training. So this is basically setting ourselves up to have a successful latter phases of training. The next phase that we'd go through would be a general strength phase, and this is where the goal is to actually start taking those structures that we've built in the hypertrophy phase and start to actually build some neural qualities. So essentially we're turning our muscle hypertrophy into strength by taking the new structures that we've built and starting to actually teach them how to be strong. The last phase that would go through when we really want to peak our strength would be a specific strength phase, and this is where essentially we're going to capitalize on all the potential that we've built in these previous phases. So this isn't so much to actually build strength, because if we do this all the time without doing these previous phases, we're not really going to make much progress. It'll stagnate quite quickly. But what this is going to do is it's really going to allow all that general qualities that we've built and turn it into high quality maximal strength. So it's going to realize the potential from the previous phases. It's going to rely heavily on neural qualities. So it's taking all that structural, that structure that we've built in the hypertrophy phases, and we're really honing in those neural qualities. So the first phase, the hypertrophy phase, we're going to be talking about how we can sort of periodize that through a training block. So the characteristics of the hypertrophy phase would be much higher repetition ranges, or not much higher, but higher than the other phases. Higher volumes of training and lower weights, so less intensity. And in terms of how we periodize this throughout a training block, would be that we want to increase our volume over the training block, but we want our intensity to maintain or potentially increase slightly. But if this increases too much, our volume, it's not going to allow our volume to actually increase over time without overreaching. So essentially we have an example training block here where we have 4 weeks plus a deload, and we can see that our volume is gradually rising while our intensity is just staying the same. And this is going to be different from our general strength phase, where this is going to be characterized by more moderate volumes as opposed to higher volumes, moderate repetition ranges, and then also moderate intensities. The key here though is that what we want to do with our periodization over a training block is to make sure our intensity is gradually increasing, and in this phase we want to maintain our volume. So this is essentially the complete opposite to what we had in the hypertrophy block, because this time the intensity is the one that's rising while the volume's staying the same, and then obviously we have a drop off for the deload week. And then moving on to our last phase, the specific strength phase. This is characterized by much higher intensities, lower repetition ranges, and much lower volumes. And importantly, when we actually periodize this into a training block, we want the intensity to definitely increase, and probably increase more pronouncedly than in the general strength training block. And we probably want to decrease in volume in this training block. So this is going to help reduce fatigue. So when we actually have our competition, or where we need to be peaked for, we can actually reduce the fatigue and our intensity is really high, so our performance is likely to be better. And as you can see here, week 5 is more going to be a taper week as opposed to a deload, because we're probably going to have, if you're a strength athlete, this might be where you have your competition, or if you're just an athlete training strength for other purposes, then this is where you're going to be able to peak your strength around here. And so now, putting all the phases together, we need to understand that we don't just do hypertrophy, general strength, and then specific strength, and then keep repeating that. The sort of emphasis of how many blocks of training in each phase we do is going to be highly dependent on a few factors, primarily on the athlete's sport, how old they are, their training age, their level of strength, if they're male or female, and also how much do they weigh. Heavier athletes are generally going to be able to, they probably have more muscle tissue already, and they can generally also handle less of the higher intensity work. So some examples of how we can do it more of a long-term periodization plan for an athlete. So assuming we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks of training available for this athlete before we need to peak our performance, assuming each block is around a month or so. So this athlete is 20 years old, as an example, has only a year of training experience, and they are a female. So probably some would argue that it's probably no even point of doing this specific strength phase, but we put it in here just for the example. So in the hypertrophy phase, we're actually going to have 3 blocks of this, because they're not that experienced, so they have a lot of potential to build in this area. So we're going to have 3 consecutive blocks of hypertrophy before only having 1 block of strength, general strength, and then maybe 1 specific strength phase. And this is different to if we had another athlete who is maybe 28-year-old male and has 10 years of training experience, and they're really looking to peak their performance in strength. We might only do 1 block of hypertrophy, because they might have done in their 10 years of training a lot of this already, and they sort of almost at their limit of how much muscle they can actually build. And then we might do 2 phases of general strength, and then 2 phases of specific, 2 blocks, of specific strength. And this is going to allow a lot more of that neural type adaptation and a lot less of that structural adaptation, just because over 10 years, there's a lot more of this hypertrophy that's likely already have been built. That's it for this presentation, guys. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of it. If you haven't already, you can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and Instagram with the links here if you want to check them out. And then on YouTube, you can subscribe if you want to keep up to date with more informative videos on this channel. On Facebook and Instagram, you'll find these latest research infographics, which is essentially the latest research summarized into these easy to understand pictures, so that you can stay up to date with the latest research on sports performance training. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you got something out of it.